this supports something that I tell people all the time, that the most important compensation you can give a human being is freedom and autonomy. And what that means is ownership over your own destiny. And if people, like, that's a classic example. Here you were getting good money, you had good stock options, you're crushing the job, which means it's not like it's a tax on your mental power, but none of that was had enough value to make you stay there.
Exactly.
Whereas if you would have had autonomy and freedom and the ability to control your own fate and destiny, you'd still be there right now. We wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be running the company.
Yeah, exactly. and you know, it's spot on. And I came into a company 2 years ago, and I can certainly name the company ForcePoint, which is we're owned by Raytheon, but a cybersecurity company. And that's what the CEO and the CHRO gave me at that company. And what's interesting is we put an ethos, a marker in the ground for the entire team. It was teamwork, ownership, humility. Turned around the entire, we walked into a dumpster fire, frankly, is what we walked into. And we were able to do great things, but that value and that ownership that they gave me, that I was able to give everybody on my team, it's everything. And so when you come into those moments where compensation becomes an issue, that value, that empowerment, that ownership you give people, they stick. And in 2 years, we had 0% attrition. Wow. Is that, what's amazing though is that that's a surprise to people.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of sitting back going, how can that be so much of a surprise? That giving somebody ownership and trust and value is everything.
Most important thing.
Yeah.
The best form of compensation. And the reason I've been able to tell that to clients at Echelon Front is I say, look, I had people that in the SEAL teams, in the military, in the Navy, if you're doing the best job, 3 times better than anyone else in your platoon, I can't give you a raise. I can't. Like, I can give you a good evaluation, and then in 2 years you'll be eligible for promotion, and then you'll get an extra $270 a month. No one's doing 3x the work because of that. But what can you give someone? Freedom. And if you worked for me and you were squared away, you pretty much did whatever you wanted to do. And I would just do nothing but provide cover fire for you. If you weren't squared away, it's a totally different ballgame. You were going to put in a box and you weren't going to be able to maneuver at all because you're doing things wrong. So
the best way to retain your talent is great leadership. And it goes back to Buford. We just did EF Battlefield at Gettysburg. He operated within the spirit of the commander's intent.
Yep.
And actually deviated from what was the plan because he saw an opportunity. I think what the Marine Corps calls it, took authority on demand and made calls that ultimately made the Union Army victorious over the Confederates. You did say something about, and we deal with this with EF Overwatch, is for some companies it's a mental leap to hire a military leader into a senior management role when they're coming fresh out of the military. And it's usually because those perceptions are shaped by what? The movies. 100%. Well, you guys, you follow orders. That it's 100% the cogs in the wheel is shaped by movies, and we literally have that conversation. Especially during COVID, we've seen that a lot of organizations did not select the right leaders coming into the organization, that were not able to innovate and adapt, that were not able to handle the chaos, could not remain calm, and were unable or ill-equipped for crisis. And what we have to educate them about, these men and women coming out, is, one, they are generalists. But generalists are much more powerful than specialists. In fact, one of the quotes from Brian Decker in this is that we've over-specialized some of the roles in the private sector. It's no longer good enough that you're an ear doctor. You now have to be a left ear doctor. And while I understand that is a requirement for certain roles, if it's a very technical position, yes, technical skills are required. But in general management roles, which are usually your top leadership roles in a company, generalists are more equipped to lead. And this is why. Because they draw from a broader base of experiences. You've been all around the world in the military. You've dealt with different cultures. You've dealt with different problem sets. You have this vast array of experiences where a lot of the business leaders that have never left the United States do not. And we're finding that experience has not only prepared them, but it's the factor in a lot of these military leaders stepping into the roles. The ones we place are being highly successful. They're performing when they step in. Of course, there's a learning curve, but the learning agility for the men and women that we place is extremely high. That's one of the things we're screening for at EF Overwatch is that, intellectual horsepower matters. It does. But once that gate's closed, these people are placed, and it's been phenomenal. I mean, you met some of the clients at EF Battlefield. They're like best hire ever.
Yeah, the trainability. If you've been in the military, you know how to learn. You start learning stuff out of the gate, and you learn how to learn very well. And so that's why when someone comes without the skill set in the civilian sector, they can learn that skill set very quickly because they've been learning all these different skill sets for 8 years, 12 years, 20 years, 25 years. That's what we do in the military is learn new stuff all the time. Going here, section called the cost of talent. When companies lack a talent mindset, it's a common refrain, cost. Creating a robust talent acquisition and management process is simply too costly, they say. What most companies don't understand is the major cost is not money, but time and devotion to creating a world-class talent acquisition pipeline. In the process, you will actually save money in the long run as your attrition lowers and you consistently make better hires. The special operations community has long understood that people are everything. Special operations soldiers go through 3 main stages: assessment and selection, training, and combat and war. And then you guys break this out. So in special operations, it's called assessment and selection. In business, it's called talent acquisition or the hiring process. In special operations, it's called training. In business, it's called talent management and leadership development. And then in special operations, it's called combat and war. And in business, it's called business, sales, marketing, production, whatever it is that you're doing. It's a pretty good little breakout there of how similar these things really are. Go on in another section here. Many companies have a fundamental misalignment between upper leadership and HR, where leadership says they want talent, but HR is not set up to actually hire for talent. In fact, HR often doesn't even know what talent looks like in the company. There is no gold standard of talent. Instead, hiring is mechanical, order-taking process based on objective requirements. Leadership gives HR a laundry list of what they want, years of experience, required skill set, compensation range, and HR goes out and fills the order. To have effective talent acquisition, your business leaders and HR department must be strategic partners. The talent acquisition team must be students of the business, understanding the organization's underlying goals and talent needed to achieve them. Since day one in my career, Joe DePinto told us, and that's the CEO of 7-Eleven, I've always had my CHRO linked at the hip and will continue to. As Joe has discovered, to function strategically, your HR department must be a part of the planning process for both talent acquisition and management. HR should be involved in succession planning and gap analysis to assess, select, and develop talent in a strategic way.
We found this, I kind of knew it intuitively and I suspected it. But when we did the research, chief human resource officers are often paid 1/3 of their C-suite counterparts. That's where it starts. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine for a second that your mechanics and your medics were paid 1/3 of what you make because they're not frontline? Could you imagine what that would look like in special operations, in any military unit? And that's where it starts. And HR is not, a strategic function. And, I had the benefit of coming up with this mentor and somebody who really empowered me, and her name is Tracy Keogh. And she is the CHRO of Hewlett-Packard. And she's just absolutely amazing. And we put this quote in the book because to this day, it's one of the reasons that I've stayed in my function for so long. And she went to an executive meeting one day. And they were like, hey, Tracy, it's good to have HR at the table. She kind of snickered, looked back at him, and she is a very strong leader. And she says, we are the table. And I was like, you know what, that's right. And that's the theme throughout this book, is that people are everything. So when you start out deprioritizing your chief human resources officer and you make this an administrative function or an operational function, how do you ever expect to get the best talent? And talent's what's driving your product. Talent's what's driving your service. Talent's in front of your customers. Talent is driving your revenue. That's everything. And then you sit there and you look at your revenue, and your revenue's declining, your attrition's high, your product's not on time, and you're going, gee, I wonder what's going on. And it takes Mike and I about all of 2 seconds to see that, and it's unfortunate. And one of the things that we really wanted to get across is you can really leverage HR in a strategic function, and it makes all the difference to every single part of your business. And the more of a talent mindset you have, and the more that you empower human resources to be your strategic talent partner, that revenue will come, that product will be on time, that service will be good. It's not rocket science, but in some places it's a brand new concept.
Let's go back to that cost. So there's an old adage, you can't outspend a good hiring process.
Yeah.
Because the consequences of having a poor hiring process can sink a company. One of the statistics we found is that for senior level executive positions, the cost of a bad senior leader can be 213% of that individual's annual salary. So, give you an example: if you have a $300,000 salary CEO or executive, that could cost the company as high as $639,000. Let's say that's a direct cost. So, what a lot of companies can't track from attrition is really the indirect costs, and that's about 2/3 of the cost of attrition. You can't put a number on the damage to a culture that a senior leader can cause. Maybe for 2 years that impacts sales, and that's what's very hard for a lot of companies, because they can't see it on their bottom line directly. Yeah. Good CEOs can.
Come hang out at Echelon Front and go work with some clients, and you'll get to see that all the time. A toxic leader, a bad leader, a leader with a negative attitude. Everyone below them either doesn't perform well or leaves. If they're good, and you know what it is? The good people, as we said earlier, the good people leave. The bad people stay there and don't perform well. That's what happens under a bad leader. It's a total nightmare.
What's the old? I think Henry Ford is credited with this quote. They were at a board meeting and they were talking about leadership development, and somebody said, "Hey, well, what if we develop our people and they leave?" And Henry Ford looked at all of them and said, "What if we don't and they stay?" This is why leadership development matters. So as you were reading that section right there, you saw George and I getting like agitated. This is how passionate we are on this subject. So through Echelon Front, I spoke with a HR group. There was like 500 HR leaders from an area. It was supposed to be an in-person conference, COVID, so it was online. But I had like 100 HR leaders reach out. They were just fired up because I talked about the book. I'm like, you guys are the key to the success of every organization. Don't let your leaders tell you otherwise. So, Tracy Keogh and Patty McCord, Patty McCord was the CHRO for Netflix, built a strong organization. Both these...
Wait, what's Netflix?
Yeah. Both these ladies should be CEOs of any Fortune 500 company. They just have a passion for talent acquisition and talent management or leadership development. And you look at Tracy Keogh, Harvard educated, cut her teeth in sales and marketing, and was asked at one point during her career, "Hey, we've got a problem with, HR. Can you go fix it?" And of course, the answer was no. They said, "Good, you got it." And she developed a passion. Your HR leader has to be a business leader. They have to. And HR, even though I love HR, sometimes has become a dumping ground for average or mediocre performers. And most often, those HR leaders are just compliance leaders. They're not a strategic function. So if your HR reports into legal, it's a compliance function. If they report into finance, it's an overhead function. But as Tracy Keogh will tell you, if they report into the CEO and have a direct line and they're involved in the talent strategy, then there's a chance in hell there's a strategic function that is going to help build the organization into a world-class organization. And so that's where that misalignment between senior leaders in HR is killing a lot of organizations. It goes back to the talent mindset.
Yeah, that's a big change. Actually, it's not even that big of a change. It's a little change that'll have a huge impact. You start getting people to really start to grow an organization properly with the right people. That's exactly what you're talking about. You go into this section here. I'm skipping ahead. This section here that I liked. It's entitled Fear-Based Hiring. Special operations community has become a world-class model for potential-based hiring, which is the foundation of their assessment and selection process. In contrast, many companies, instead of hiring the candidates with the most potential, hire those candidates that inspire the least amount of fear. This kind of fear-based hiring usually comes down to one of three fallacies. Number one, red flags are more important than green flags. Number two, leaders shouldn't be outshined by their followers. And number three, somebody's better than nobody. You go on. In traditional corporate hiring practices, the objective has seemingly shifted from hire the best to hire the familiar and safe. People are more afraid of a bad hire than they are excited by a good hire. You go on here. Fear-based hiring is dogmatic about objective requirements. You guys already talked about this. Black and white criteria make it easy to say yes or no. Does this person have X years of industry experience? Does this person have Y degree? These criteria don't matter nearly as much as you might think. Lieutenant Colonel Brian Decker, former commander of Army Special Forces Assessment and Selection, told us, "When I arrived at my command, anything easily measured was heavily weighted in the selection process. The problem was it didn't have a lot of predictive value." The same is true in business. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean it's important, and just because you can't measure something doesn't mean it's not important. The only question that truly matters is, does this person have the potential to be a top performer? Don't disregard red flags entirely, but don't obsess over them either. In combat, you don't want to get shot, but at the same time, if your primary concern is not getting shot, then you don't go into battle. If you make your hiring decision based on avoiding your worst case scenario, you'll never achieve your best case scenario. It's far more effective to look for green flags than for red flags.
Oh, people are scared, and I don't want to get too far down into the minutia, but if you're a manager and you've got an empty seat, so many people that I've seen over 20 years are like, I'm going to lose that seat. If I don't get it filled with somebody, I'm going to get somebody in there. So anybody is better than somebody. Then they go down the objective requirements like, well, they don't have this, they don't have this. And so they're checking off red flags of objective requirements to put somebody in a role and never asking the question, is this the person with the character attributes that can do the job? They're not looking, they're literally scared. Well, if I hire this person and, they don't have 5 years, how am I going to be looked at? What if they don't do as well as I think? And they don't think that their leadership can take somebody with the right characteristics, 2 or 3 years less experience than they've marked, and put them in the role and coach them to succeed. They're scared to death. They want it just turns into this machine. How fast can you hire? How fast can you get that butt in a seat?
I'll take that a step further at the risk of being a little bit of a stereotyping people, but who's hungrier? The person that has 2 years experience going into a role that needs 5 years experience, or or the person that has 7 years experience going into a role with 5 years experience required. Who's hungrier? Who's trying to prove themselves a little bit more? I don't know, man. I'm kind of leaning towards that 2-year hungry individual that wants to prove themselves.
And I've seen this time and again is, the recruiters that I've brought up, the talent acquisition specialists, I call them talent consultants because they're really embedded in the business. They'll go, hey, I've talked with this guy. Yeah, they're 2 or 3 years light on the experience you were asking for. I promise you.
They're hungry.
They're hungry. They want it. They want to get after it. And the manager says, well, they don't have the 7 years of experience. And it goes back to what Brian Decker said. They picked 7 years almost out of the air. That 7 years is not predictive of success. Working for a competitor is not predictive of success. Character attributes are predictive. and you need to be watching for those.
Check. Another fear-based hiring problem. Leaders shouldn't be outshined by their followers. Average or underperforming managers often fear hiring someone who will outshine them because they don't want to hire themselves out of a job. There should never be a maximum standard for talent, only a minimum. If you're not hiring people better than your current employees, you'll never raise the bar for talent within your organization. That's just the classic, surround yourself with people that are better than you.
I want to work myself out of a job. I want to have, and we go in a little bit later about succession planning, I need to have as many people who can take my place, and corporate America doesn't do that, succession planning. We do it in the military, it's muscle memory. But I always want people who are going to push me to be a better leader. They're going to push me to get better at my game, to up the game. I mean, when you roll with people, do you roll with people that are easy to beat?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Echo. This toxic environment.
Sorry.
I know, bro.
Been here for an hour, just waiting for a moment, bro. That's the first moment for Echo Charles to shine.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do roll with people that are easier, a lot easier.
Yeah.
You do, somebody's better than nobody, and you talked about that, just feeling like we better get someone in the platoon. And this happened in Charlie platoon. Leif had a good guy, but he just didn't really have just couldn't get the job done. And coached him. We wrote about it in Dichotomy of Leadership. But one of the things that I told Leif, I said, hey Leif, if you get rid of this guy, you're not getting another one. I mean, there's you're going to go on deployment with missing a guy, and because we're gonna get rid of him. And Leif was like, well, and he thought about it. He said, you know what, I think we're better off without him. And that, to me, that was a little litmus test for me, because Leif might be thinking, hey, I'll just replace him with some other guy and we'll step it up. It was a litmus test for me to see what Leif really was thinking. And if you really would rather not take someone, then that means you don't feel comfortable with them at all.
So there's a quote from Charlie Beckwith. For the listeners, Charlie Beckwith is the founder of Delta Force, served time with the SAS, which generated the idea for a specialized force. He had a quote that was, I'd rather go down the river with 7 studs than 100 shitheads. and it goes to point that, I'd rather select highly talented people into the organization and have less people than, volume. Quantity is not better than quality. It never has been. And the quote from Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, 500 BC, about the 100 soldiers on the battlefield. 80 are just targets. 10 don't even deserve to be there, and then there's 10 that are warriors. But that one will always bring us home. I mean, these guys all talked about the importance of talent, and you'd rather bring talented people in individually than build a massive, quick army. That's when you deviate from the process, and it works out poorly for you.
Yeah, when you bring the wrong person in, you're actually just creating more drain on your time.
Just mayhem.
Yeah, mayhem. And then it's a cancer. And then your A players are looking at you going, why'd you bring a C player in? And now it reflects on you as the leader that your bar wasn't high enough, that your standards weren't high enough, that you were tolerating this C player or this B player. And we all know how that works out, and never, ever well.